The 1980s and the early 1990s definitely were the golden age of the game book form, especially if you look at the numbers. Then you have Fighting Fantasy, Lone Wolf, Choose Your Own Adventure. But now I think we're experiencing a phenomenon which can be called the golden age or the second golden age, not in terms of numbers or popularity or visibility, because definitely there's a more limited phenomenon, but definitely in terms of quality and even more so of ambition. This is probably because the people that are reading game books now are the same people that read them back then. We read them as children or young teenagers, and now we are middle-aged adults, and so we're more discriminating, we're more demanding. But that also means that there's a possibility for writers of game books to create books that are indeed more ambitious than before. And so the form, to me, seems to have reached a whole new level. It is now elevated to a level of complexity and sophistication which was virtually unknown before. And this is why now, for example, we have game books that are released that are over 1,000 paragraphs. This is not unheard of these days. But of course, it was too much back in the day. It would have been too expensive. You didn't know if the readers were gonna appreciate that. Readers that are 8, 10, 12-year-olds. The publishers probably would not have risked that. But today you have different ways. Say with Kickstarter, you know in advance that your product is going to sell. Little intro to tell you about the Steam Highwayman. This is a new gamebook series. I read the first two books, Smog and Ambuscade, and Highways and Holloways. And these are the two first books in a series that is structured as an open world game book. Again, another interesting concept. We had originally Fablelands, the series that started in the 1990s, was interrupted. Apparently, it is being continued now, and it is the idea of an open world in a game book format. That is, you have your character, and then you explore this world without a specific mission to complete, like you had in the Lone Wolf game books, or in the Fighting Fantasy books, in which really there was only one good ending. You just go around, you experience different things, you pick up missions, you meet one person here and another person there, maybe there's a connection. Probably actually the earlier example I can think of was a hybrid between a board game and a game book, which was Barbarian Prince, that had that open world feel to it. Although there you still had a victory condition, a mission that you had to accomplish, which was to earn enough money to win. So Steam Highwayman, just like Fablelands, and then more recently also The Valley of Bones, an open world game book system. It is a game book proper, so not like a Choose Your Own Adventure that we call a game book, although it has no game mechanics. This is a book with game mechanics, so with an inventory, with random events and random ways of resolving things, with score, etc., etc., etc. The story, and I cannot tell you too much, I don't want to give you spoilers, but the setting that I can tell you about. It is a sort of steampunk 19th century, early 20th century England. And I would say it's low fantasy. Well, low fantasy, when we use the term, we don't mean in terms of quality, but how much fantasy there is there. But high fantasy is usually a story set in a fantasy world. Low fantasy is a world that looks much like ours with some fantastic elements, maybe vampires, werewolves, etc., etc., etc. This is a really low fantasy. There were many times in which I forgot that this was a fantasy. I even forgot that it was a steampunk story. Yes, it's steampunking because you go out with this, you have this like nice little modified motorcycle, and there are this other weird vehicles, and there are weird corporations and companies. But ultimately, it really just felt a story set in the earlier 20th century. The idea that is interesting is a highwayman, and so the book is truly morally gray, meaning you don't have to be a good guy or gal, you don't have to be evil, it is completely up to you. If anything, there's no way of tracking that. So it's not if you did something, then there are a lot of things that may happen. Well, the law may pay attention to you. If you murder somebody, or if you steal money from a certain group, then the group will come after you. But there isn't a construction of the characters such as if you murder a lot of people, maybe you tended to become a little more callous about that. Maybe you will are less likely to have a lot of empathy for other people. So there's a sort of psychological consistency, but the world reacts to what you do. So the more you break the law, the more people will be running after you, which is not necessarily a bad thing, because ultimately, when you die or when you decide to retire, there is a way of keeping track of your score, of see how much your action contributed to turn into a legend and being a little bit of a bad guy or bad gal may help. Fame and notoriety may come from different ways, including breaking the law and having many enemies. That also makes you famous. So the strength of the book is that it really is an open world system, and precisely like in similar other things, you can move from book to book. So if you are traveling, say, on this map, and you are on this map here, and you move in this direction, then the book will tell you, go to the section such and such on this book, and then you can travel back to this one, and then back to this one. And there are more books that are planned to make the world even more open, so you can really travel in different places. It's set mainly, again, in this low fantasy, very realistic old England, with detours maybe somewhere else. I don't want to spoil that to you. Maybe, who knows. Now, I like the open world, I like the game system, I like the writing. Unfortunately, this is not a game system that I fell in love with, say like Valley of Bones that I tried recently, or the old Fablelands. Any may be entirely me on. I'm not making any general assumptions. I'm telling you this. Until I read these books, I didn't realize how important it was for me, the thematic variety that you have in fantasy. I'm traveling in a fantasy open world, and then here's a giant scorpion, here's a dungeon, here's an undead mage, somewhere else is an army of lizard people, and then later a dragon kidnaps me, but on top of the mountain where I'm brought, I found a magic sword and a flying carpet, etc., etc., etc. I took that for granted, and there's no better way of realizing how much you like that than missing it. And that is pretty much the problem that I had here with these two books, which are well written, well designed, but for me, they are too thematically uniform. And this may be because of the idea of, trying to give you a more realistic, a more consistent universe. Maybe it's the steampunk doesn't give as much variety, but still with steampunk you could have a lot of monsters, a lot of mad scientists that do a lot of crazy stuff, weird machines. Why not aliens? Why not Lovecraftian horrors? And hey, I'm not the writer, so the writer decided to go for a more low fantasy, more realistic tone. But my problem is after a while that I was traveling around, the landscape started feeling a little bit samey. And maybe also that these two books are sort of like the countryside with small towns, there's more villages. The third volume that has been planned is about London, so they may have a different feel. Then it goes to completely crazy, savage places like Scotland for future volumes. But as of now, I just felt I was traveling to a nice little town, and the descriptions of the towns are very detailed, but it almost felt like, I don't know, tourist guides, not really, because these are not places that have any touristic value. Almost like, I don't know, a report from somebody that's surveying the thing. So the description tells you if this town has a lot of brick houses, or what are the houses made of, and what is the local economy, and how are the roads, and what happens at the freight yard, and is there or isn't there a telegraph station. And there are pubs everywhere. That seems appropriate to the theme. There's even a place where you can list all the beers that you drink, and that's your thing. But after a while, I don't think, again, there isn't a single game book that I played in my life in which I visited so many freight yards, in which in one place I'll discover that they're shipping coal, another place they're shipping wood, and maybe talk to a guy that makes a deal because they're shipping lead, and I can go, oh, I give him a contact for some other people that are delivering lead. Then luckily enough, I can go out there and murder somebody for fun, but then I go to the next town where I'm given the choice of going to the pub or going to the freight yard or going to the telegraph station. And the telegraph station, in one place there's a guy that tells me about his son, in another place a guy that tells me about how boring his job is, and I'm like, I'm figuring that out because I talked to the other guy in the other town, the other telegraph guy. He also looked bored. And I go to another town, and more or less the choices are the same. The houses may look differently, and one town is a bustling town, one town has a stagnant economy, one town again deals with a certain kind of business, and another one, but it just felt very samey. And again, I actually must say I can even appreciate the originality of the experiment, because this game book does have a feel that is different from the previous ones that were clearly dominated by high fantasy and sci-fi, the game book format in general. The open world game books that I experienced so far, they all are high fantasy. I appreciate the originality. I just wish that there was more internal variety in the stories. After a while, and this one's like, okay, I'm done with visiting all these telegraph places and drinking beer, and then I went to the other area, which is next to it geographically, and again I found very similar situations. Again, with occasionally, mind you, the totally unexpected crazy adventure that really feels different, but it doesn't happen very often, and is not enough to make up for all of those visits to villages and towns that look really much the same. Again, from time to time you decide to ambush somebody, but ambushing a passing carriage, a passing car, a passing motorcycle, again, it doesn't have all that much variety. Yes, again, you pick up missions, you do things, but after a while I was just a little bit bored because to me there was not enough variety. Again, it's a personal, subjective thing. Maybe that's exactly what you want. You're tired of all of those fantasy worlds that are just patchworks of different ideas. They don't make any sense internally and consistent, and there's no consistency. Here, somebody's shipping a good down the river, you can then visit the town where the good has been delivered, and you can admire that consistency, that approach to story world building, but it's not for me. So this is my assessment of the first two Steam Highwayman books. I like the idea. I like the open world thing. If you play the old Fableland system, the second volume, it really reminded me of the second volume where I had the same problem. I was traveling around a fairly nice countryside where I was traveling around, there was an open world, but not a lot happened that really held my interest. If you think that book in the Fableland system is the best one, you're gonna love these ones so hard. For me, there was just not enough internal variety. I think it's a good idea. Maybe the next books will have more variety, but as of now, my reaction has been a little bit lukewarm.